over. Sorry, there's the recording. Continue. Okay. I'll get there. I'll get past that line. Okay. We are thrilled to have Mario Alves, the Secretary General of the International Federation of Pedestrians, with us today. And you're going to hear a little bit more from Mario in a minute. He's going to give a short presentation on how walking can help cities become more resilient, which is what we all want. And he's also going to present some emerging issues that are happening around walking before we move on to a bit more of a roundtable discussion so that we can have some interaction, which is always a challenge when we're online. But before I do invite Ben, our Chief Executive, to introduce Mario, I would like to give you just a quick update on some things that are happening in Victoria Walks. Some of you might have been at the Smart Urban Future conference that was happening just a month or so ago. Again, that was a virtual conference. And we got some excellent feedback from the conference. So that was terrific. And all the presentations and the video recordings are now up on the Municipal Association of Victoria. And I saw Jeff somewhere in there, yes, website. So we'll pop up the link. And I think, yes, you've already got it up there, Ben. Popped up the link in the chat if you want to access those. And thanks again to MAV for being such fantastic partners in the conference over so many years. So it's a great partnership that has worked really well over many years, and we hope we will continue into the future. Like many of you on the call here on the session tonight, in the walking and bike riding space, particularly in Victoria. Again, for those that are in Victoria, we were really pleased to see the recent climate change strategy announcement, and particularly to see a target in there that's increasing active transport trips by 40% by 2030. So it's great to have a target of 40%. I guess the only thing is that, and you might have seen an Age article yesterday, where we did express some level of disappointment that we didn't see a significant investment going alongside that strategy to fund some of the actions. So we'll continue to work to see whether we can get more investment to enable us to actually achieve that target. And finally, I'd just like to mention, I'm very excited on behalf of our board and our staff to announce that we have a new strategic plan over the next 3 years. Which I think Ben's also going to post a link into the chat. See if he's as quick on this one. Look, there it goes, popped up that quickly. Well done, Ben, right on target. And this is a really exciting time for us because we've been around for 12 years, and each strategic plan, we kind of continue to hone in and really focus on where we want to be and what we want to achieve. And we really want to continue to inspire more people to walk more every day, as many of us here and why we're here today, and to really build thriving walkable communities. And I guess two of the key outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and we've actually committed to this in our plan, is we're wanting to increase walking participation, whether that's through recreational, incidental or transport. And we also want to see a demonstrable investment in walking by all levels of government and decision makers in our community. So two big ticket items, very specifically highlighted in our strategy. So we're always been committed to collaborating to capture and translate and promote data and evidence that can really influence the conversation and actions of our decision makers. So I hope you enjoy reading our strategic plan, and I'm sure you can come back to Ben and the team if you want to discuss that in more detail. So thank you again for being here, and I would now go back to Ben to introduce Mario.
Thanks, Kel, and hello everyone. Before I start, I'd like to let you know I've pressed the record button because a few people can't make it, but if that's an issue for anyone, just send me a message a private message in the chat. I can limit the recording to Mario's presentation. And now how we'd like to run the sessions, Mario will just give a short presentation and then we'll just open it up for discussion, and probably the easiest way to do that is the hands up function down in reactions, or pop something in the chat, but I think just an open discussion is the best way to proceed. Well, I've introduced a lot of speakers over the years, and none gives me greater pleasure than introducing Mario Alves. And I first met Mario, probably walked 21 in The Hague in 2010, and I've been walking and learning a lot from him since. Unfortunately, as travel's a lot less, I think I'm going to miss walking and exploring cities with him. I think the last one was Rotterdam, and we also went around Bogota for a few days, which was wonderful. Mario is a trained engineer and is a transport mobility management consultant, and he's the Secretary General of IFP, as Kel said. And as some of you know, I'm the Vice President of IFP, but that's really a very minor role compared to Mario's. Mario represents and advocates for walkers, walking and walkability at numerous international forums, often usually invited, whether it's the UN, World Health Organization, OECD, International Transport Forum, the European Union and more. But I think equally impressive is his commitment to supporting grassroots advocacy around the globe, which is a really key part of Mario's work, and his, I guess, his personal ethics about really, working for the developing world as well. So, and all this is done, I think, with a great knowledge and expertise and far more tact and grace than I could ever muster. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Mario. Thanks, Mario.
Thank you, Ben. It was really a pleasure to hear you describe me, because usually I send a blurb wrote by me and it's a bit embarrassing to see people reading it, but actually someone that we have been working now for over 10 years maybe. So it's really great to hear someone that knows me talking about me. I probably don't deserve all the compliments, but there we are. I don't pay him to say all this. So I'm going to share the screen. Just to say also that Victoria Walk is a very precious contribution to IFP. Let me share the screen. So yes, as Ben said, I'm going to speak, about 10-15 minutes, just to give some pointers for our conversation. And I will speak a little bit about IFP, and this front page is about a project that IFP is participating right now, and I will speak about it. It's quite a big project. It's called MORE, and I will speak about it. And then I will speak a little bit about, in general, what means to advocate for pedestrians, and what are the future trends, and what some pointers that will be useful for our conversation. So here we go. I usually like to start with this photo. Many of my presentations start with this photo. This is when we were hypermobile and we travel around the world for conferences and meetings. And I was in a hotel in London, and from my street in the morning, I saw this scene. And this is fascinating because it has a lot to unpack here. As you can see, there is two barriers that seems a bit invisible, but they are there. And as you can see, some of the pedestrians are avoiding the barriers. Actually, these suitcases with wheels, when we were mobile or hypermobile around the world, they were really fantastic ways for pedestrians to go around. And you could see it in airports, you could see it in cities and all that. So, and here you see something also that is in urban design that is a comment in our democracy as well, because we have a car that goes in this garage maybe once a day, once a week, and then it's disturbing thousands of pedestrians, because this was near Victoria Station in London. And pedestrians are really bothered by 1,000 cuts, as you can see, because this garage, there would be more garages along the way. So you see that some of the pedestrians are putting themselves in danger on the tarmac because they cannot use the sidewalk, the footway, as they should, or they could. So basically, there is someone that gave preference to a car in this photo, and we actually don't notice these small details. So this is MORE, and MORE is called the Multimodal Optimization Road Space in Europe. For you that are not so familiar, Europe subsidizes a lot of projects, science-based projects on transport in all kinds of disciplines. And the IFP is doing for the first time a project with many partners around Europe, around 16 or 17 partners. There are universities and local authorities and private consultancies, and each one has its own work package, and each one we have meetings, we contribute to reports, and we have five cities case studies. So if you want to go to the website, there is already quite a lot of reports that came out, and this is quite interesting because it's about a very tricky problem. Because in Europe we have a strategic road network. Probably in Australia you have the same. You can see the map here. So it's the road network that goes around main cities in Europe and ports. And the problem is when they get into the urban area, there are major roads with trucks, for example, that go to ports, harbors, and they actually mix with pedestrians, cyclists, public transport, and all that. So how do we restructure those major roads in an ecological multimodal function? And that's the main problem of this project. So usually it's much easier, and we know how to change local roads or to change city center roads, but these roads actually that are getting into the cities are a major challenge, because we have to commit the compromises between all the modes, and actually we should give priority to pedestrians. So this is a project that I highlight here, and it's quite important. So now about IFP, and as I said, Victoria Walks has been a key element since I've been Secretary General in the last 10, 15 years that Ben has been our vice president. We have members all over the world. I just put here because the membership is always changing. We are in around 40 countries and 50 NGOs, because some countries have more than one. Our members in Australia is Queensland Walks and Victoria Walks. We have members in Australia. And basically, it's a very, very varied kind of membership. And we do fight for the rights of the pedestrians and for the voice of pedestrians in international organizations, like Ben said, in WHO, United Nations, but also in other instances. Because pedestrians, as you really know, if you've been in other sessions and in your profession, you know that pedestrians are usually forgotten, and cyclists are always very strong and very, and they always have things to say. And it's very, very important that we are there. And pedestrians. So pedestrians are a very, very complex kind of and very confusing. I'm a civil engineer, as Ben said, and I've been studying mobility and transport. And until like 20, 30 years ago, pedestrians were forgotten, as you know, because pedestrians are very, very complicated to plan, are very difficult to characterize. And, this is a city street in Barcelona, and you can see it's very, very confusing. And I will speak a lot about challenges like automated modes and all that, because it's very, very difficult to know and to characterize what the pedestrian is. So when we are talking about pedestrians, one important thing will be language. And language, it's very important when we are changing paradigm, and we are changing paradigm in a lot of things. Language becomes very, very important, because language cannot cope about how we describe things. For example, and when I start working 30 years ago, 20 years ago, non-motorized mode was the way to describe pedestrians and cyclists, which is really a little bit of a humiliating way to describe pedestrians and cyclists, because it's, it's saying what we are not. And actually, in the last 10, 20 years, we've been speaking about active modes, which links with health, which I know that Victoria Walks works very intensively. And lately have been people saying that maybe we should say desirable modes or valuable modes, so that we actually put pedestrians in a pedestal, something that we really want to promote. Vulnerable road user is something that I still use. I use it quite often, because it's a fact. Because we don't have this exoskeleton around our body like a car to protect us. So we are vulnerable like the cyclists, but maybe we should start speaking about desirable road users instead of vulnerable road users, because we are vulnerable because of the car. That's That's the only reason we are vulnerable. So that's something that's in the language we should start changing. The other thing that really fascinates me is the road safety and the use of the word accident. Road safety is a little bit like George Orwell, the doublespeak, because in fact we are speaking about road and safety. But in the 1950s, when road safety was more or less promoted, they needed a soft and cute name for something that is really terrible, because 1.3 million people die around the world. I think there is no other machine, human machine, that kills so many people. So we prefer the expression road danger reduction, because calls a spade, and we don't like to use the word accident, because if you think about it, accident is just a very small percentage of all the crashes that occur. So this word accident, there is a very, very good book, which is Fighting Traffic. It's a history book that really points out that the word accident was introduced by the car industry to more or less excuse the drivers when they would go to court. So when they would go to court with the word accident, already was an act of God, something that happens, a bad luck. And that's something that the car industry introduced in the newspapers. And there is a lot of work to be done on this aspects of language and how is reported. I think there is a very, very nice report recently, like 2 or 3 days ago, came out in London about how the press reports crashes and with cyclists and walkers. And I think this is important. Another thing that is important about what is a pedestrian is universality. And this is sometimes is not very well understood, especially if we are doing campaigns or, you know, road danger campaigns or road safety, as they call it, campaigns. We have to segment what the pedestrian is, because a pedestrian can be a 5-year-old, can be an elderly with Alzheimer, can be someone with mental health issues, can be someone a blind person, can be someone in a wheelchair. So it's a very, very, very varied entity, what a pedestrian is. So when you say, or when you hear that pedestrians walk too slowly to cross the street, or some kind of generalizations like that, you can call them out and say what kind of pedestrian you are talking about, because people don't think that pedestrians are very varied. Or when they say that also pedestrians should have responsibility on road safety, you should say, are you talking about a 5-year-old, for example? Are you talking about, when you say, for example, that pedestrians should cross the eye with the driver when they cross the road, you should ask, what about the blind? So people really forget what a pedestrian is or what a pedestrian means. They tend to think about themselves. So the other thing that is very interesting is about that pedestrians, we are 100%, which is in a way wonderful, but on the other hand, we lack political identity. And that's terrible. I think compared with the bicycle advocacy, pedestrians is usually quite weak. Actually, I have to say that Victoria Walks is one of our largest and more professional organizations around the world. We have maybe Living Streets UK, it's quite big. We have Swiss organization. Then we have Victoria Walks. I think it's one of the largest organizations we have in around 50 organizations, as I said. So a lot of times there is 1, 2, 3 persons active with pedestrians. When I'm a cyclist activist myself, when with cyclists, there is a very, very strong commitment. They really make it a lot, very strong lobby, because they are 1, 2, 3% sometimes. And so they feel like a rarity and they feel discriminated against. So really they are very strong politically. So take this into consideration, that the fact that we are 100% makes us forgotten and make us less active in terms of meetings. And also the fact, which is very important also, that we are 100% of voters. And this is something that we should also say to politicians, and they are usually sensitive to this, because in fact, we really vote, and we are a lot of people. The other thing about that is very important about walking is that you should count. And a lot of times in projects, we don't count walking. We count cars, we count cyclists, but we forget to count walking. And as the saying says, you know, what you don't count, it doesn't exist. And it's very, very important to count and to measure quality of walking. There is a lot of measures of walkability, that is the quality of walking in streets, and you should always try to do that. And I always advise when you do a project to count pedestrians before and count pedestrians afterward, because then you have a lot of arguments, political arguments, to say that the street got better. What is the main problem for us pedestrians? Okay, speed, of course, is a big problem. And everybody knows that speed kills. We just put out last week, a few days ago, a policy paper on speed because it was the UN Road Safety Week. But one thing that less people talk about is this idea that when a car is going down the street, the tunnel vision of the driver really is much narrower at 50 kilometers per hour. And this has a lot of implications on road safety, of course, because you see less the pedestrians, as you can see in the image here, but also on terms of social capital, for example, on terms of looking at the street, shop windows, in terms of understanding how society works. So basically, when you go at 50 kilometers per hour, you disconnect from society and your city. You are on your own world, and you feel you can just go, and you are potentially a little weapon, basically. So what about actual and future needs? Well, one of the things, obviously, is the quality of public space. So good footways, good pavements, streets, shade. With climate change, trees are hugely important, are going to be even more important in the future. Benches. I have a father that is 101-year-old, and he goes to the supermarket just down the road. And he said to me that when they put benches halfway, it was really a lifesaver. So he can sit halfway to go to the supermarket. So pedestrians need parking. A lot of people don't think about that. You know, we need benches, and with the world getting older, the benches will be very important. And active frontages. Pedestrians get bored when they are just walking along streets with garages or blind frontages. They don't have any interest to them. And of course, safety, I already spoke about it. Lower speeds is very important, and abundant and safe crosswalks. Crosswalks are very, very important, and they should have an island if we have a quite broad street, because an island is the place where they can stop and negotiate the rest of the crossing. And of course, air quality and noise reduction. Air quality, and this is about, I have a slide about air quality and noise reduction. I'll speak later. This is a problem that in Europe happens a lot. We will tell me during the conversation if it happens in Australia, is parking on the sidewalk, on the footway. That's something that happens in England. It's not illegal in England yet. And the rest of Europe, it's very common. And that's something that our members really fight very, very much around the world. Another thing that happens, and this is about the quality of public space, is, you know, a hole on the street is a problem. So when we have a hole on the street in the tarmac, there is always phone calls, and they get fixed very quickly. But when we have something like this on the footway, you know, it can go on for years, and people just complain, but they don't complain. So there is something, and there is a statistic that is quite remarkable. 75% of pedestrians that go to the hospital, they have nothing to do with a car, they fall on streets. And that's something that is not considered and not in statistics of road safety. So it's like an invisible problem to pedestrians that are not on statistics. So about air quality and noise, as I said, one thing, and I have here two references, and you can write me later if you want to know about this, and this is very important for the project more, is that the air quality and noise affects the quality of public space and is strongly related to social equity, because mainly the streets that more studies, and the main streets that have more trucks and more pollution and more traffic, usually they go through poor areas and poor neighborhoods. So what about future challenges? I just highlight two here, but we can talk a lot other ones during our conversation. One is autonomous vehicles. I'm not going to speak too much about it because it's still a little bit science fiction, but you know, we can see it, we can read a lot of contradictory articles on the press, but one important thing is that the safety of the most vulnerable should be the yardstick and the centerpiece of the debate. You can see all these simulations that you can see in YouTube and presentations by mechanical engineers of cars doing marvelous things without drivers, but usually they don't put any pedestrians on the way on the scenario. So pedestrians are not there. So pedestrians, they have really very hazards movements. They have, you know, sometimes they're people that are blind and all that. So so it's very, very important that pedestrians are at the centerpiece of this debate. The other problem that I think is very interesting, and I'll speak a little bit more, is about micromobility. I know that in Australia, e-scooters are not a problem. It's something that you are discussing right now. I think Ben told me that. But one thing that the IFP is strong about is that motorized vehicles should not be allowed on sidewalks. And this is very, very important, of course, with the exception of motorized wheelchairs. So just to sum up, this is a problem, and it was a huge problem before COVID in Europe, because I know you didn't get this tsunami, but cities like Paris or Lisbon had about 10 operators. It was really messy, with a lot of e-scooters on the footways and a lot of e-scooters operators that with the Lime and all this, you probably read on the press, that have all this parking of e-scooters on the footways, and it was really, really messy. And I hope that now with COVID, we get a grip on this. Another thing that seems a little bit science fiction, but it's happening because now, as you know, delivery with COVID is becoming very, very important. And a lot of companies like Amazon and eBay and is investing a lot in this kind of devices. And this is a challenge, and, you know, a very, very dramatic events might happen in the next decade about these things. So how can we build on with the crisis? And I'm not going to speak about COVID. I know you had other previous talks on COVID alone, but I think we should build on now on COVID, and we are seeing the light in the end of the tunnel, hopefully. So we will start traveling a little bit more again. But there is a few aspects that I would like to highlight. One is tactical urbanism. The other one is space-wise planning and the super blocks. Public space, parklets, and the classic traffic calming. I'll speak a little bit about that. So one thing is tactical urbanism. So tactical urbanism is about very quick and cheap solutions that you can just do it overnight, and can improve tremendously with very, very cheap solutions the public space. I have here an example in Europe, in Freiburg. This was Friday, one of the main streets. And this is what they did on Saturday, and this is the street on Saturday afternoon. So you see, you can experiment with tactical urbanism, how a street could look like in a very easy way. So you can have 1 week of a street like this, you know, and that generates public debate. And people usually in the end of the week, they don't want it back as it was. So that's very, very important that people experiment. And of course, parklets, which is transforming previous parking spaces in places for where people can sit, and very importantly, free spaces, because usually these terraces are paid. And this is spaces that anybody can use to work, teleworking, which is very important now. And this is very, very important to have this like micro parks in the street. And this happens everywhere in the world during COVID. As you can see here, there is a very improvised and a bit ugly, but a way to transform a parking space to give a little bit of clients to this restaurant, because in Europe many restaurants were closed till very, very recently, and they lost a lot of income. And this is another example of tactical urbanism in Lisbon. So they contract artists to conquer space. And of course, there is the deliveries that are already, as you can see, invading these spaces. So there is a lot of conflicts in cities that we should start. Another thing I would like to talk is about superblocks. Superblocks is something they are doing a lot in Spanish cities. It's a very old concept that comes from Buchanan, a book from the 60s, which is environmental areas. And basically is to protect neighborhoods from crossing traffic. So there is, instead of traffic and cars to go everywhere, they stay on the main streets on our right, and the blocks are protected from crossing vehicles, and only residents can go into the super blocks. One very important thing in terms of traffic calming, and I'm almost finished, is continuous sidewalk. And you can see this is something that every city in Holland and every intersection in Holland uses. And this is the way it works. It's very easy. The car goes up, you know, the pedestrian and wheelchairs are comfortable at level all the time. And it's very, very safe, even for cyclists. And you have the 30 km/h. Another thing that's it's very common all over the world is that traffic engineers, they make a setback 5 meters, 10 meters of the crosswalk. Of course, the crosswalk should be in the desired line of the pedestrian. So the crosswalk should be where the pedestrians usually cross. So usually when the civil engineers or traffic engineers do the crosswalk in the wrong place, usually pedestrians, they ignore. But another thing we should do is to make the radius, the corners radius much tighter so that the speeds slow down. So, and now the final slides. I'm sorry, I might have gone a bit overboard with the time. But one thing that is very important, and IFP is being fighting, is how to make a total change in the paradigm how we see the streets. And this is a slide from Peter Jones, and he says that cities around the world have stage 1, which is a car paradigm city, so a city that is only designed for cars. And then they have the stage 2, which is sustainable mobility cities, where they have all this kind of traffic calming and paid parking and all that. But he argues that some very few cities around the world, and in the future, we will have the city of places, which is a city where the public space is designed for people and not for cars. And one thing I've been saying lately in the last 5 years in Bogota, as Ben said, I had a presentation about this, is that we have Vision Zero, which is very, very important, and it was very, very important for cities, but maybe we should start speaking about beyond Vision Zero, and that's something that we've been speaking about this, is not rejecting the previous Vision Zero, but is updating the Vision Zero. And what is, because Vision Zero is about 20 years now, and what is the differences? And this is it. When Vision Zero focus on fatalities, so 0 fatalities, we should focus more on modal shift, because we know that when people walk more or cycle more, it's more safe. Instead of road safety, as I said, we should speak about road danger reduction. Instead of traffic calming, which is a solution of civil engineering, it's a bit ugly sometimes. We should speak more about trees. We should speak about more shrubs, parklets. So we should speak more about livability. And instead of being an ethical imperative of Vision Zero, it should be a political choice to design streets for walkers, for cyclists, for everyone in general. This is it. I like this slide because as a civil engineer and a traffic engineer for decades now, 2 or 3 decades, I'm not that old, I've been discussing if the pedestrian crossing should be before or after the curve. And this traffic engineer in Spain solved the problem with a bucket of paint, and he did before, after, and during the curve. And in a very cheap way, thinking outside the box, he solved the problem. And this is something that drivers understand what it means. Thank you, and sorry, Ben, for overstepped my time.
That's okay, Mario. That's a lovely photo image to finish on. I hadn't seen that before, but thanks very much for that. I've just got we might just open up to questions, but I've just got a couple of things. Mario, are you okay if we get to share your slides with participants afterwards? Because there's some little gems there, I think, people. So
no problem.
If you can send me a PDF or something, we'll share that.
Yes, I will.
That'd be great. And it was good. Peter Jones, that last slide. Peter Jones is, for those who don't know, is leading the Mall project, and he came out and keynoted Smart Urban Futures. We bought him out, I think, 2 years ago. Who he did? His was the not moving in place, Lincoln Place. So that which
Lincoln Place.
What moving in place is based on. So that's the very same Peter Jones, who's a wonderful man.
Exactly.
But what might be good from now is if people have some questions or discussions or points or anything, just maybe raise your hand, and so it's not everyone at once. And if you're comfortable, it'd be great if you have videos on, if you're not doing too many other things in the background, so we can see who's around. It's always nice to see your friends. Oh, thanks, Pen. But if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and let's take it from there. There's one thing that prompted, Mario, while you're talking about active frontages, and which reminded me, Walk 21 starts this week, and I'll put it in the chat. It's free and it's open, but the session I'm moderating has got Helga Hiltmutter, who's a Norwegian researcher, has really fascinating work on public transport. We often think about getting direct, safe, convenient routes to public transport, but he looks at something else. If you make a route stimulating and interesting, so as a walker you just see things around, you can triple the patronage, because if it's interesting as well as safe and convenient, time flies. So you will walk along, which is really, really fascinating. He's got data from around the world. So if you can log on, I think he's giving about 15 minutes at the start of the session on Thursday, but it's fascinating. Now, has there got anyone asking a question? It's not going to be me asking questions, is it? For goodness sake.
You can ask the second question.
Yeah, they might be sick of me. But I notice Anna from Queensland.
But I was,
yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I was with him once in Copenhagen. We both were the keynote speakers in the meeting in Copenhagen, and I was fascinated. It was like 5-6 years ago. He was just finishing his PhD, and it's indeed, everyone can feel that. When we were walking along streets that are interesting, you can look at the flowers from the flower shop. You can see, what's new. It's much more interesting than just walk a street that is just garages like in the suburb. So that's why people go to the city centers to walk and to enjoy themselves, because time flies, you get entertained, you can sit. So that's something that we really have to change. One thing I say sometimes is that you have to change cities from corridors to living streets, from corridors to living spaces. Yeah, that's something that actually we should do. Any questions?
Yeah, John has a question. Take yourself off mute, John.
Thank you. Maro, loved it. Thanks very much for that. I've got two questions, and I'll just ask one that you answer and then ask the next. They're pretty short. The first one is interested in the language, and you had up there vulnerable road user. In future, let's talk about a desirable road user. And I just wondered, has that language been tested with anyone? In strategies that I'm writing at the moment, we use vulnerable road user a lot. If I wrote desirable, I sometimes wonder what somebody might think.
No, of course. This is when we are changing paradigm, language, and this is happening also in gender neutral language and all that. So that there is a process, and of course, we should of course push the envelope slowly. And for example, the word accident, I catch myself saying it all the time. I correct myself, and there is a process that we take time to learn. And of course, vulnerable road user, for example, is something that I use all the time, to tell you the truth. So this was a little bit of a trick for you to start thinking, so yeah, why are we vulnerable? We are vulnerable just because there is cars, why we should be considered vulnerable. Actually, there is some, for a parent to say you should take your vulnerable child to school is not really the best way to to encourage them to take the children to school. So when we are, for example, that's something we struggle every day. For example, when we are planning pedibuses and we have children that look like Christmas trees, like with the high visible jackets and all that, which is probably not the best way to do it. So, but of course, I don't condemn the parents or organizers of pedibus to do it, because we are in the transition phase. So please use vulnerable road users. I use it all the time. But beware that sometimes, be a little bit self-reflective on this idea, because that's something that we might change in the future. But no, this has not been tested. It's something that activists like us have been pushing slowly. But of course, some people say valuable road users, desirable road users. But it's just a way to click and to get like people think about the language in general.
Just add to that, Mario, before John, you asked your second question, the comment in the chat that the new road safety strategy, we've just got a new one in Victoria, Mario, uses the term unprotected road user, which is a bit better. Unfortunately, we don't have unprotected road user funding, but it's really good. And I think it's Anna from Queensland Walks, also talking about not near misses, but near hits. I think
very good.
Janet's, which she agrees about vulnerable, it makes walkers seem passive rather than active, and I agree with that, Janet.
Exactly.
So, John.
Well, first of all, thanks for that answer. That was great, because you've already given me ideas how I can use it in certain circumstances and move in the right direction. So that's good. The other thing, I guess, also in the chat is coming out from England, where we, at the time when I was there, we referred to accidents. Australians, I believe all over Australia, refer to crashes, and that was a very quick lesson for me to learn when I came out, and an excellent lesson as well. The other question I have is, I wonder if it comes up very often, because I feel it strongly, but it's not very often talked about, is use of so many vehicles not only is, dangerous, and there's the pollution and the noise and so on. The other thing is they ruin the aesthetics of lovely English villages and European villages and little towns in Australia. I think they're an absolute eyesore, but I'd never really see it referred to much, but that's maybe me. I wonder what your view is on that.
That's true. That's not very much talked about. And I saw a few pictures, before COVID, about these beautiful Devon villages with, beautiful Tudor houses and all that, with really bright colored cars parked in front of. And that's something that, of course, even the tourist authority should start realizing that, if you want the Instagram picture of your trip, you don't want a car in front. But that's a double-edged sword as well, because Europe has been struggling with hyper-tourism. So a lot of people, for example, in city centers in Europe, especially like Mediterranean cities, also start criticizing, saying this is a city that is for people, not for tourists. So it's something that we have to be careful about, beautification. That is, trying to clean the streets and the excessive cleaning of the streets. But it's a point that we should make it and understand that, it's something that probably we don't make it so strongly because of that. Because, for example, Lisbon struggled for many years now, in the last 5-10 years, about tourism and excessive tourism. And if we start saying we should clean the city center because of tourists, people might get a bit angry about it. So yes, there is this balance that we have to consider there. And of course, there is something that about deliveries. I was in a conference a few weeks ago in London, online, of course, and they put me with the guy that delivers beer, which is a great strategy, because nobody, if he was a guy delivering for Amazon, there would be all these activists against him. But with delivery beer, nobody was against delivering beer. So so he made a very good point that, for example, with bike lanes, that he has to park very badly and put the kegels of beer on the top of the bike lane. And activists for cycling were quite okay with it because it's beer. So, there we have it. So delivery vehicles also can be an eyesore, but they are very, very important how the city moves around. And actually they can be allies, because what's the problem is private cars, commuter cars with one person. They have 10 times less economic value than a truck. So of course, trucks should be smaller, and they should be less intrusive visually in cities. But that's a very good point you make.
Mario, you just made me think of something. Only today, I was looking out the window of one of the windows in our building and looked down on there's a pub just up the road from us called the Carlton Hotel, and I Facebooked an image about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, that was all the kegs completely blocking the footpath. And we had a follower who used to engage in everything we did. And when I questioned the kegs of beer on the footpath, she gave a narky comment, and I never heard from her again. So I don't know what happened to it. I was thinking about it today. I was going, trying to think of what her name was. But anyhow, so something about beer and active travel. Yes. Rachel's put a question in for you, Mario. What's the safest speed for an all ages and all ability walking community?
That's a fascinating question, because as you in the last 2 months, in terms of speed, humanity and activism made a huge progress, and I tell you why. The 30 km/h was something that in Europe has been being pushed since the 60s. There is 60 km/h zones in Germany since the 70s, this last century. So it was basically about zones, you know, so there was considered zones. And then already this century, like in the 00s, like 2000s onwards, there was shared spaces that were places where pedestrians and cars couldn't mingle and coexist. And they were like between walking space, which were Woonerven in Holland. Actually, there are very early examples of that. That was walking space. But in Switzerland and in France, they were called home zones or shared space, and they were 20 km/h. So in a way, it was 30 was already was still with the sidewalk, so there was a segregation, a separation, and 20 was for shared space. And of course, there was a few arguments and controversies. For example, the Switzerland, as you know, shared space. I don't know if you have this sign in Australia. Shared space is a blue sign with a little house and a kid playing with a ball. And the Swiss, they are very organized, and they took away the ball from the sign. And which some person said, yes, to play games on the street, you cannot be 20 km/h. It should be 10 at least, or it should be maximum 10. So what was the progress in the last months or so is that the WHO and the United Nations and there was a Stockholm Declaration last year that said that should be where there is vulnerable road users and traffic mixture, they should be 30 km/h. And of course, that means for us that all urban areas should be 30 km/h, which is huge because it became from a fringe demand from activists to the WHO and the United Nations. So that's an amazing thing. And you can see already results, for example, a very conservative state organism in Portugal that runs road safety is already speaking about 30 km/h cities, which is huge, you know, and confuses the general public, because the general public really doesn't accept that 30 km/h cities is even possible. Some people even think that the car just cannot work at 30 km/h. So it's mind-boggling. So it's a discussion that is going on. And what I find out is that when we are in the last month speaking about 30 km/h cities and not zones anymore, suddenly lower speeds start to be part of the discussion. So people start saying, oh, but 6 km/h is safer for children, or 10 km/h is safer for children. So once you start lowering down the standard 30 for all the city, of course, you can even have some exceptions, like in major, roads, ring roads and stuff. But once you start speaking about the standard of 30, suddenly speeds of 10 and 6 start to be part of the discussion. So yes, it's a discussion going on right now.
Thanks, Mario. Dwayne's got a question that COVID has changed the way streets are looked at in the UK a lot, but not in Australia. How have other countries dealt with it? And you can elaborate if you like, Dwayne.
Yes. Okay, there was huge changes in Europe, especially, and the United States. There are some databases that collect the changes that were made, the pop-up So like all this tactical urbanism, which was a little bit of a fringe thing 10 years ago, was activists that were doing parklets, a little bit illegal. I did my own parklet at 6 o'clock in the morning, being a bit naughty and and without being official, and it stayed there for 2 or 3 days until they took it away. So it was really a fringe thing, and suddenly cities took on the tactical urbanism, cheap solutions that are done overnight, and they've been doing a lot of it in Europe. Unfortunately, they've been doing a lot of bike infrastructure and not so much walking infrastructure. And that's something that we see all over the world, unfortunately. So we see a lot of pop-up bike lanes. There is kilometers and kilometers of pop-up bike lanes in some cities in Europe. And unfortunately, there was a lot of terraces because the restaurants were closed. So there was a lot of terraces on the footways, which is a problem. And Spain, for example, is in the law that the terrace should not be on the footway during COVID. So that's explicit in Spain, even if our organizations in Spain say that this is not really kept. But that was a problem for pedestrians, of course. Another problem for pedestrians and cyclists was that during COVID, with less traffic, the speeds increased because there was less cars on the street. So actually the number of people hit by cars by vehicles on the road increased sometimes twice to twofold during COVID, which is something that it's rather worrying. So that's something that is, a bit counterintuitive. Less cars on the road can increase speed. So that's a problem. And we should, lower down speeds. A lot of this 30 kilometers per hour, for example, movement from WHO, from the health sector, it comes from COVID, of course, because suddenly we realize that health will be the discussion of this decade, of course, with COVID. But there is, if you write me, there is databases of what cities around the world are doing. There is an Excel done by activists that are done from activists from all over the world that input on the Excel all the things that cities are doing, and it's been quite a remarkable, in certain cities, quite a remarkable change. In other cities are still asleep, unfortunately. But basically what they did is, what happened actually was that cities that were a little bit more advanced in their plans, they basically increased the speed of delivery of the plans. Cities that were a little bit still figuring out what to do, they are still figuring out what to do, and which is unfortunate. Oh, Ben, you don't have.
Sorry, yeah, it's probably better
yeah.
if I'm quiet anyhow. So
Yeah.
that's probably present. Yeah, I think it's aptly sums it up. I think, Mario, those who weren't ready still aren't ready. Anna from Queensland's question around best practice on pedestrian wait times at signalised crossings. In Brisbane, the council advised today that wait times can be up to 150 seconds. Previously, this was 90 seconds. Can you talk about best practice, please? Oh, Anna, that's terrible. Yeah, Mario.
Yes. Yeah, you can have tea. You can put a tea table by the crosswalk. I think would be a good protest against that measure. Okay, yes, that's something that is highly political, and I think I like to speak about how public space and how the distribution of public space is political, which is fascinating if you start looking at it. For example, that garage I show you as my first slide. It is a political statement when you really put the car going, the car has more comfort to go to garage than the pedestrians that are crossing, for example. So the time of traffic lights is highly political, of course. And that's something that technology, of course, is never neutral. Technology has a paradigm behind it, and you should always look at it and call it out. One thing, I don't know much about the time of waiting time, because I don't have those numbers straight in my head, because we work in Europe about crossing speeds, which is the time of green, full green for pedestrians. And that's something that we discuss a lot in Europe, is the speed of pedestrians, okay? And to tell you this, how political it is, for example, in the United States is 1.5 meters per second. So they are pushing pedestrians to walk faster. And in Norway, which is a little bit more friendly, they have the speed of 0.8, so 1.5, 0.8. So they are more tolerant to pedestrians, elderlies that walk slower. So that's something that in Europe is between 1 and 1.2, so it's a little bit better than in America. I would love to know what is the speed, standard speed for pedestrian crossings in traffic lights. But I would not be surprised if you use about 1 or 1.2, which is really what usually happens in the rest of the world. So that's something that I've been talking more is about the crossing time that pedestrians feel comfortable with. The waiting time is very, very important because, of course, because if people, and I've been in Korea, in Seoul, and it was terrible, you know, people would wait ages and ages with their mobile phones because they had like 5 lanes to cross, and they would wait and wait, and it's very, very, and that's something that also we should do research about, is the speed of pedestrians and how impact all this and the waiting times that Anne spoke about, how these waiting times increase tremendously the speed of pedestrians. The speed of cars is something that we know very well. We know that intersections and the weight intersections is the most important thing for the speed of cars, for the average speed of cars. But the weight at traffic lights is the most important thing in the average speed of pedestrians. So, so if you wait a lot in traffic lights, your average speed goes to rubbish basically, and you just are encouraged to take the car. So, so that's very, very important element, and I think I should study more about waiting times to have to you a better answer than this.
Thanks, mate. No one's got their hand up or a question at the moment, so I might ask one if people think.
Oh, actually,
one.
Ben, I can ask one. Sorry.
Go for it.
I was just interested, and it's always been an issue, I think, with walking, is that when you mentioned about the taken for granted, the 100% of us are walkers, and it's almost like this, it's not special. It's like we all do it. And I guess I'm just interested to see how you mobilize people, because often you can be walkers, but you can also be a car driver. And it somehow seems to be that if you're a driver, that seems to be the default than walking. So I just, is there anywhere in the world that's not been set and planned for pedestrians in some parts of Europe, for instance, that have really done this really well, that have really managed to mobilize walkers to really shift some of these paradigms that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, that's something that even the IFP has been struggling with because, for example, funding for pedestrians, you know, even organizations that should know better, like the European Union or the United Nations, or even WHO, that should know that walking is probably the healthiest thing you can do, even more than cycling. They tend to forget walking. So that's a very, very tricky question. And on funding, usually people, after thinking a little bit about it, I say, well, cycling has an industry behind it. So as money, for example, you know, so there is money for the European Cycling Federation. It's, you know, they have a turnover of a few million. They have a conference that have like 1,000 or 1,500 people that go to the cycling conference. So it is something that we've been struggling. And when I say that about the industry behind, the next thing people tell me is that, oh, you have Nike. And I say, well, we've been writing to Nike for a long time, and they don't answer. They don't think about, you know, that their shoes are, I think 90% of their shoes is for walking, it's not for sports, as you know. So we do have an industry that is probably not aware that what they are providing is devices to walk. And that's something that even the industry is not aware of what you said, that actually they, you know, their clients are walkers and not athletes. And when they actually make all the advertising, it's about athletes, which people don't recognize themselves on, right? It's about people that do very, very fast running, that they are not their clients. So that's a fascinating point, is how make people think that, and especially local authorities, you know, and that's something that also activists struggle with, is shall we be only promoting walking, or shall we also be a little bit against the car? And that's a very, very common debate into the advocacy and the activism behind doors. Shall we be just positive, or should we be also negative? And of course, being a traffic engineer myself and a mobility manager myself, I know that plans that only have positive measures, they don't work, unfortunately. So we have to have the carrots, and we have to have the stick or the whip, which is a little bit ugly ways to say it. So now, how to have this encompassing and general message that car drivers can go along? One phrase I like a lot is that if you, and I think is from Urbanist that you had last year in your conference, is if you design your street for cars, you fail everybody, inclusive car drivers. Because one study that has been done is that car drivers in general, they hate to be car drivers. There is 10% of car drivers that they love to drive. They love to drive, but 90% of car drivers, they don't like the queues, they don't like to look for parking. So they really have a negative attitude towards driving. So that's something that we should tap on. You know, there is a lot of females that don't like to drive. They probably would like to walk around. So yeah, that's something. But answering your question, there is still a lot to be done to create this universal message, and to make this message that bring everybody along, being a car driver. There is a lot of things that we can talk about, and even maybe people on the chat here today can have some ideas. How can we bring car drivers along with us? Because that's something that is quite obvious for us, but not obvious for everybody.
No, someone's just messaged me to say they haven't got a thumbs up down the bottom, so they can't do in the reaction. They haven't got a thumbs up option. If that's you, you can just jump in, or just put in the chat you want to ask a question. You don't have to say what the question is, just let me know.
I'm not reading the question, so I hope you are.
Yeah, I am having a bit of a look. But Jeff's got a question, Mario, which is, in looking to the next phase of Beyond Zero, you suggested a move from ethical considerations to political choice. How do we help drive that political choice? How do you, or we?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. And in fact, sometimes when I gave this presentation about moving beyond Vision Zero, I understood, and my last slide was a Trojan horse. And why was a Trojan horse? Well, a Trojan horse because Vision Zero, when it was created 20 years ago, was a bit of a neutral, ideological neutral vision that everybody agrees with. So right-wing politicians, left-wing politicians, whatever this political spectrum, they all agree that children should not be killed, and should agree that nobody should be killed on the road. And that's something that's across the political spectrum we should agree about. You know, that's something that, and that's a Trojan horse, very strong Trojan horse. That's why there is Vision Zero cities all over the world that actually are from all kinds of politicians, from all kinds of ideological backgrounds. So it's easy to understand. People should not be killed on the streets. Easy to understand, easy message. So going beyond Vision Zero is not rejecting that, and is not rejecting the ethical imperative. The ethical imperative is very strong, and it's very, very easy to understand. What is about is saying things like, what, not being killed on your streets is a kind of you know, a kind of a modest ambition, right? You want is a street that is livable, it's good to walk. And just to say I don't want to be killed there, you know, it's a good ambition, of course. It's something we should struggle with. But it's a rather modest ambition. You know, you should have good streets, you should have fun streets, you should have livable streets. So that's the push that probably politicians, and of course something I say a lot, is that votes are gained on public space. And that's something that some politicians understand. If you plant trees, if you make streets beautiful, that gives you votes. If you are just not making streets for people not to be killed, actually that's quite an invisible work for politicians, because you know, even if it is dramatic, if it is very, very bad, usually people killed on a road is a statistical odd, very rare event. It's something that happens in cities like once a week, you know, so that's something that happens to others. So voters really are not very worried about road safety. It's a problem of road safety because it happens to others. It happens to a very far member of the family that you don't even know, or, you know, people even have this Stockholm syndrome, you know, oh, the grandfather was a bit slow to cross the road, or he didn't look very well. So people even start blaming the victim. So road safety is not politically so interesting for politicians in a way, but livable streets are, because that's where they get the votes. That's where they get the votes because they have seating, they have trees, they have, you know, art, you know, so there is buttons to push on livable streets. So, and I have to say that Vision Zero sometimes is mostly speech, and it's a failure in many, many American cities. They've been talking about Vision Zero in a lot of American cities, and in general, the results are mixed results. Some cities are doing well, most cities are not doing so well. So that's my take on this, but I'm sure people would have other ideas. It's beyond Vision Zero. I gave you the perspective of what could be the struggle in the next few years. So we are on the edge. We're still thinking about it.
Thanks, Mario. I do like that vision of, you know, fun, good, livable streets is what we should be aiming for, where the neutrality of, I hadn't quite thought of it that way. I must admit, I do like that thinking.
Yeah.
I just had a quick question about air quality, because we seem to be so far behind Europe in seeing the impact of air quality on health. Although there was some document that came out of the department, I can't remember what it was, the Department of Transport recently, big roads, where air quality was seen as a target. I can't remember what it was. So it seems like we're slowly getting there. But is air quality a really big issue in Europe, or is it just some countries?
It is, and it became a really big issue with COVID, because there is studies that start to relate air quality with mobility of COVID. And there are some studies, there are still research to be done, but there are some studies that point out that Milan, for example, which is a dust bowl of pollution because of geographical conditions, Milan was one of the first cities to be hit with, and cities like New York. So cities that, so we don't know if we should blame on density, which is something that is very good for us walkers, or if we should blame on pollution, and not only car pollution, but for example, you know, India struggle also with fireplaces and people cooking, for example. So pollution is a problem all over the world. Of course, pollution might be going down. Of course, Europe made a big mistake because of climate change 10 years ago, encouraged people to switch to diesel. Diesel has particles. Particles are terrible for the lungs. They can go to your bloodstream. They can go to your brain. So now Europe in the last 3-4 years is back pedaling very quickly, but people now have diesels, and now diesels are all over the place. So it's a big problem. And of course, as I said, in poor neighborhoods, usually there is major roads that are more polluted. And there was a case that I called to your attention that was like 6 months ago, that a child, for the first time, a court case in London, the motorway that was next to a child's home was blamed, or, you know, for the child death, because she had lung problems. She had asthma, I believe. I don't know exactly her clinical details. She died. The mother and the activists put the state, London, or I don't know exactly whom they put in court, and court actually delivered after a few years that indeed her death was due to the motorway. And this is a huge change in terms of liability of local authorities. So suddenly this can be a big change all over the world, in Europe and the rest of the world, when we start relating the death of a child or an older person or any person because of near roads nearby. Because suddenly local authorities can be liable to keep to the standards of the WHO, which are quite low, and most cities don't keep. The other thing is noise. You didn't speak about it, but noise is going to be huge also, because noise, there is more and more research that noise creates heart conditions, can have problems with mental health problems, with people getting stress situations. There is a lot of studies that people, for example, I can see your frontage, Ben, of your background. People don't use the front of the windows. They only use the back rooms from the road. So people research how they use the house, for example, and they don't use the front rooms because unconsciously they avoid their front rooms. They just use the back rooms. So that's something that we should talk more and more about, is about noise. Just a last remark. Of course, with electric cars, most of you would say, okay, some things will be solved, of course. Yes, but one thing we know also, and that's very surprising with recent research, is that particles come usually from the clutch and from the tires and the tarmac. So between half and 75% of the particles, they are not coming from the motor, which is quite an amazing thing. So a few years ago, I would say that the electric cars could create clean congestion. And I stopped saying that because in fact, it will be congestion. So public space will be unsolved. So space is still the major pollution, but it's not so clean, electric cars. So that's a problem we have to deal with.
Thanks, Mario. We might finish up. Before we do, Mario, can I just ask you to just do one comment on one final thing, which is just, we see a lot of what's happening in Paris, and looking at banning traffic, and other countries doing really quite significant things. How's that viewed in Europe? What Paris is doing? Is it just they're just doing it, or is it seen as amazing, or or not?
Yeah. Paris, for the past 20 years, is doing quite a lot. And of course, Paris is a very dense city. So it's very good for walking. But of course, Parisians and the French are very in love with their cars. They have a car industry. So last century, Paris was full of cars, of course, like everywhere else. But in the last 20 years, they're having a very continuous progress in terms of taking away car space. They have Paris Plage, which is, they made a beach by the river. Now I forgot. What's the name of the river in Paris?
Seine. The Seine.
The Seine is the Seine, of course. The River Seine, they made a beach. They put sand along the Seine to make people used to it. And now it's made permanent. So it's a huge project that they actually, but of course they were put on court. There was a case in court for about 2 years, and then finally the mayor of Paris won. And there is Anne Hidalgo, which is a female mayor that just won the elections last year, with a concept which is the 15-minute city. I know that in Australia, sometimes you speak about the 20-minute city, which is more or less the same concept. Of course, your cities probably are a little bit more spread out than Paris, so you need 20 minutes. But it's a wonderful one-phrase slogan. They really get into the press and to the ear of people. People understand immediately that they should have bakery shops. They should have, kindergartens at 15 minutes walk distance. So that's an excellent way to understand how the city should work. Because architects in the 60s, they thought that things should be divided, places to sleep, places to work. And it was a huge mistake, and the modernist city did not work. So going back to concepts like the 15-minute city, where commodities and shops are at a walking distance, is something that will take a while, because cities take a long time to change. But of course, Europe is changing quite considerably. Cities in the Mediterranean base are very dense, but Barcelona is doing a lot of work on that. So Europe, actually, because of the cities are quite old, and they naturally and organically are not made for cars, except on the suburbs, they actually can do quite huge progress in the last 10 years. So that's something that we've been doing. For example, the 30-kilometer-hour city it's something that in Australia or America can be a little bit far away and a bit utopic. In Europe, it is in a lot of cities something that it's already done, and it is working. So, and that brings us to something that we've been not talking about, which is cycling, of course. And it's always a touchy subject that we should talk about. And I know that, for example, in cities down under or in Latin America, cycling sometimes is allowed on sidewalks. That's something that we do strongly are against. So it's something that should not happen. So basically what I say is that we should be friends, but we are just companions of unfortune. We should, because they are very powerful in terms of lobbying. So we should always hold hands with them and fight together for bicycle infrastructure. And we should not fight for the breadcrumbs of the car city, because that's, you know, a very ugly city when the weaker ones or the vulnerable ones fight between them for space. That's something we should not do. So so cycling is something that also some cities are struggling with now. For example, Holland. The cyclists are getting a little bit uncomfortable because after 20 years or 30 years of favoring cycling, now Amsterdam discovers that been treating pedestrians badly in the last decades. I was with Ben walking with someone from the local authority of Amsterdam last year, 2 years ago already, yes. And he was a little bit apologetic by the conditions. Of course, we gave him a tough time, friendly but tough time. And Amsterdam is changing and is giving more space for pedestrians. And now the cyclists had an article in The Guardian 3-4 days ago that cyclists are a little bit, angry that pedestrians are getting a little bit the upper hand, which should not happen. You know, we should talk more with cyclists. We should fight together. I think that's something that is not the cyclist or the pedestrian that control the street. So that's something we should learn. So we should not fight for the breadcrumbs, basically.
Thanks, Mario. We might finish then, and after we've finished, I'm going to go and get on my bicycle out the front of the building and ride home in the rain, and I'll probably fight with myself all the way home, having arguments. But yeah, so thanks.
Exactly.
Mario,
I'm a bike activist myself, so I know how to do the bridges, and you know, there are bridges to be made.
Yes,
a lot of them.
So Mario, look, thanks very much for your time. It's really been wonderful to hear you speak, and also take questions on anything. So, which, you know, admiration for doing that, and very much appreciated. And also thank you, because Mario, so it's very early in the morning he had to get up, and Mario is a night owl. I know that because when we have IFP executive meetings, it's usually, I don't know, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning here, and something like 11 or midnight over there. And him and the president are up and, you know, having a beer sort of thing. So I kind of do enjoy that it's the reverse, that you have to get up early.
It was Ben's revenge this time.
Yeah, although I am an early riser these days compared to you. But anyhow, look, really appreciate it, Mario. It's fantastic to get, you know, a bit of context and hear what's going on there and hear your thoughts. And that's really wonderful. And so
thank you for the invitation. And you have in my email, I think it was in the presentation, but Ben will know my email. If you have any question, just ask me and I will answer questions from all over the world. You know, IFP has very, very varied things, from wild dogs in India to snow clearance in Canada. We try to answer all kinds of questions from all over the world. And let's keep walking and cycling as well, of course.
Okay, well, thank you, Mara. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us and your questions. And no doubt we'll catch up again soon, maybe not in person, but online. So good night.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Very much. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mario. There's a couple of people obviously still there, but yeah, that's great. So I really appreciate it. Okay,
Okay, good. Yeah, so I was just trying to see people going.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah.
But it was good.
Yeah. Thanks very much. But yeah, if you can send us the presentation, we can flick that round. But that,
in fact, because my presentation don't have many words, what I do sometimes is put some notes notes underneath. Yeah.
Only if it suits you, but
yeah,
don't do it.
they already have it. So yes,
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
try
yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't worry. Yeah.
That's
I will
good.
send a PDF with the notes
Yep.
or something. Yeah.
But,
Okay. Don't worry.
Oh,
and-
perfect.
Yes.
Great. And everyone, just about everyone stayed the entire time. So well done, kept people there.
Yes.
So,
Excellent.
you know,
Excellent. Very
good
good.
stuff. Okay.
He's
Well
from
done.
Europe. Okay. Good. See you
Thanks,
around.
Mario. Yep.
And
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Mario.
Thank you, Erica, for all
Thanks,
the
Mario.
support from the previous support was very good. I felt supported all the
Yeah.
way.
Oh, good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank
mate.
you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank